They said it was impossible, that no writing by Jesus could survive 2,000 years. Yet in a shadowed cave carved into the cliffs near the Sea of Galilee, a sealed parchment emerged, wrapped in layers of cloth, hardened wax still clinging to its edges. The first scientist to lay eyes on it froze. This was no ordinary artifact. It was as if time itself had been paused to protect a single secret. The scroll's preservation defied logic. Centuries of dust, water, and shifting rock had left it intact, its fibers unfrayed, its surface unbroken. The wax was unusual. Not clay, not string, but a resinous coating that modern analysis would later identify as a substance reserved for highly significant documents. Its placement deep within the cave, wedged behind a jagged limestone wall, suggested deliberate concealment. Nothing about this discovery felt accidental. Every detail whispered caution, intent, urgency. When the parchment was unsealed under controlled laboratory conditions, the first shock became apparent. The writing was in Aramaic, not Greek, not Latin. Aramaic, the spoken language of Judea, the private language of families and streets, not of temples or official proclamations. Carbon dating confirmed an origin between 30 and 50 AD, and the opening line bore a name, Yaakov, James, not a disciple, not a crowd, a brother. Immediately, scholars realized this was not public instruction. It was a personal letter, meant for a single reader. The text itself offered more astonishment. It was not a sermon, not a prophecy, not a doctrinal treatise. It was intimate, almost confessional. Phrases like, "The truth must be carried, and not all hands are made for its weight," appeared without flourish, without explanation. No miracles, no divine claims. The tone suggested a human awareness of burden, responsibility, and misunderstanding. Each line carried precision, a subtle urgency that indicated the author knew exactly who would read these words. The scroll's concealment deepened the mystery. Unlike communal storage of other ancient writings, this letter was wedged into a narrow crevice, wrapped and sealed in a way that suggested secrecy rather than preservation alone. Layers of wax and cloth were not merely protective, they were a lock. Whoever hid this document understood its value and its danger. Fingerprint analysis and micro-impressions hinted at careful handling over centuries, almost ritualistic. Every fold and crease pointed to intention, not chance. Then the subtleties of the language became apparent. Words were chosen for intimacy. "My brother in blood and spirit. Forgive those who use my name too quickly." There was no claim to authority, no command, no call to action. Just quiet communication, precise and personal. The syntax, uncommon in formal texts of the time, suggested a voice speaking directly, unfiltered, to someone he trusted. The human element, the anxiety, care, and specificity, was undeniable. Historical context added another layer of astonishment. This cave, long considered ordinary, revealed itself as extraordinary. It had been overlooked for centuries, yet here lay a message preserved against all odds. The surrounding rock formations, erosion patterns, and sediment deposits all suggested this scroll had been intentionally hidden, untouched, for 2 millennia. Archaeologists noted the positioning, a narrow space accessible only to someone small enough or determined enough to reach it, emphasizing deliberate secrecy. Even the physical characteristics of the parchment suggested more than age. Microscopic analysis revealed subtle signs of repeated handling, impressions from fingers that had pressed the layers together. Tiny traces of ancient oils and plant resins indicated careful treatment, not casual storage. This was a document treated almost reverently, preserved with intent that extended beyond ordinary care. As the team examined it further, the parchment revealed layers even more intricate than first imagined. Secrets encoded not just in words, but in substance itself. Shadows beneath the primary script revealed shapes invisible to the naked eye. Words had been written, erased, and rewritten, layering the parchment with mysteries hidden for centuries. Microscopic impressions traced the trembling of a hand, each groove a silent echo of hesitation and deliberation, suggesting thoughts weighed against time, intended for one reader alone. Under the lens of chemical analysis, the ink disclosed another layer of intention. Rare minerals mixed with plant resins created a composition resistant to decay. This was no ordinary writing. The materials had been selected to endure, to survive untouched for millennia. Every line, every crease, every hidden fold promised deeper revelations waiting to emerge, each particle a quiet guarantee that the message would remain intact, ready to shock the world when finally uncovered. Handwriting variations became visible under magnification. Slight tremors, sudden pauses, subtle shifts in pressure suggested the letter was composed in moments of tension. The flow of the script betrayed a mind balancing urgency with careful precision, a pulse of anxiety preserved in ink. Each line retained emotional weight, compressed yet unmistakable across 2,000 years. Folds of the parchment held evidence of repeated handling. Layers overlapped irregularly, implying clandestine movements, secret inspections, or deliberate transfers. Minute traces of oils and fibers embedded in the cloth pointed to careful preservation. The scroll had been touched, folded, and protected with deliberate care, each movement preserving the intimacy of its creation. Microscopic indentations hinted at fingertips pressing letters into the parchment, leaving subtle impressions invisible until scanning exposed them. Patterns suggested repeated attention, tactile devotion that spanned generations. The scroll itself became a map of human contact, silent and precise, recording interactions invisible to anyone who might stumble upon it. Infrared imaging revealed markings between lines, symbols etched into the parchment, simple strokes, circles, annotations. These weren't decorative, they were personal cues, shorthand, a glimpse into the thought process of someone meticulously crafting the text. Each symbol, each imperceptible adjustment, layered depth onto the message, preserving its intended intimacy. Residues on the scroll told another story. Smoke particles and traces of ancient oil hinted at the environment where it had been stored. The crevice in the cave maintained conditions that were nearly perfect for preservation. Humidity, temperature, and natural protection combined to hold the parchment almost untouched. The material itself became a record of the place, time, and conditions of its concealment. The phrasing of the text carried anomalies that drew attention. Word choices were intimate, almost conversational, deviating from formal Aramaic patterns. Syntax suggested a voice speaking directly to one recipient, anticipating understanding, emphasizing nuances that formal letters of the period would never attempt. Every sentence reflected private attention and careful calibration. Tiny pollen fragments embedded in the edges of the scroll revealed its origin with precision. Flora from the Mount Arbel region confirmed it had never traveled far from where it was buried. The parchment, wax, and inscriptions were a closed system, preserved locally, untouched, and yet carrying the weight of centuries of secrecy. Microscopic scans uncovered faint layers of overwritten text. Corrections, adjustments, and subtle changes indicated the author revisited thoughts mid-composition, balancing secrecy with urgency. The writing was dynamic, evolving, and meticulous. Each alteration added another layer to the message, a continuous unfolding of intent. But the manuscript held secrets even beneath these deliberate adjustments, layers so subtle they were nearly invisible, waiting for modern technology to reveal them. Beneath the visible lines, subtle indentations suggested a sequence of letters pressed faintly into the parchment, almost imperceptible. When amplified with multispectral imaging, they revealed a secondary message, a whisper within the text. It wasn't a correction or annotation. It carried phrasing that shifted tone, almost as if the author had embedded a private code meant only for the recipient. Fragments of pigment along the margins hinted at contact with metallic objects. Tiny flecks of gold and copper, microscopic yet present, suggested the letter had been stored alongside precious items, or perhaps touched with implements used for ritual or ceremonial purposes. Every granule of metal became a clue. This was more than correspondence. It was a treasure of intent. Traces of a faint, acrid scent were trapped in the fibers. Chemical testing suggested burnt incense or resin from sacred oils, the type used in early Judean ritual spaces. The scroll had absorbed its surroundings, retaining sensory evidence of environments long vanished. Every inhalation of analysis brought a hint of a distant, vanished world. DNA remnants discovered on the parchment raised more questions. While degraded, samples indicated multiple human handlers across centuries. Hands that touched, preserved, perhaps studied the letter without ever revealing it. Each fingerprint left a microscopic story, evidence of devotion, curiosity, and secrecy layered across the ages. Patterns in the wax itself became legible under high-resolution scanning. Tiny cracks and impressions suggested the seal had been broken and resealed multiple times. Whoever had handled this document ensured it remained protected, yet accessible to someone they trusted. A cycle repeated carefully over unknown generations. Ink anomalies emerged that defied conventional understanding. Certain letters fluoresced under specific wavelengths, revealing invisible strokes applied with unusual precision. The technique indicated knowledge of chemical reactions unavailable to ordinary scribes, hinting at expertise or ritualized practice beyond standard writing skills. The letter's phrasing contained subtle foreshadowing. Lines interrupted mid-thought, sentences curling back into themselves, implied anticipation of misunderstanding or misinterpretation. The voice within the text seemed aware of future readers, aware of the chaos and confusion that could follow, layering a quiet warning in plain words. Sediment and dust trapped within the folds preserved microscopic pollen, spores, and fragments of nearby rock. Analysis traced them directly to the cliffs and caves surrounding Mount Arbil, confirming that the letter never left its hidden environment. Every speck was a fingerprint of time, a record of the world in which this message had been intentionally stilled. Strands of organic fibers embedded in the parchment suggested contact with human hair, potentially used to mark passages or reinforce sections. The fragments carried compounds unique to a small population in ancient Judea. Even in death, the human connection persisted, a trace of the intimacy encoded in the letter's creation. Ultrafine scratches along the parchment edges hinted at hurried handling, possibly during emergencies, relocations, or concealment from intruders. Every abrasion recorded urgency, a tactile story of caution layered atop the message. The letter had survived not by accident, but through vigilance, touch, and secrecy that spanned centuries. Sudden anomalies in the text's syntax became apparent under digital analysis. Certain words repeated unusually, others inverted, forming a hidden pattern that suggested a message within a message. Scholars struggled to decipher it. The code seemed deliberate, intimate, requiring understanding of both language and context unknown to casual readers. Layers of sediment trapped in wax folds preserved minuscule insects and plant material, unintentional yet precise evidence of its environment. Each embedded particle mapped centuries of geological and biological history, turning the scroll into a record, not just of words, but of place, preservation, and concealment. Chemical mapping revealed residue consistent with rare essential oils, possibly applied deliberately to deter degradation or mark ownership. The choice of compounds was meticulous, suggesting knowledge of natural preservation techniques uncommon even in early Judean practice. Beneath the wax, faint impressions hinted at symbols unrecognized by modern linguists. Lines bent into shapes that mirrored constellations visible from Judea 2,000 years ago. Every curve, every tiny indentation seemed deliberate, a hidden layer of meaning, encoded not in words, but in celestial patterns. The parchment was both a message and a map, whispering of knowledge beyond immediate comprehension. Traces of a rare resin, preserved in near-perfect condition, released microscopic pollen from distant regions when analyzed. The materials were not local. Whoever prepared the scroll had traveled or had access to substances spanning hundreds of miles. Each particle became evidence of a network, invisible, precise, and intentional, suggesting that the letter's guardianship had spanned far beyond the cave. High magnification imaging revealed a watermark embedded in the parchment fibers, forming an intricate spiral. It was unlike anything known in Judean craft. The spiral intersected with key lines of text, subtly emphasizing certain words over others, almost like a hidden voice guiding the reader's attention. The pattern's complexity suggested a knowledge of geometry, symbolism, and secrecy intertwined. Infrared scans uncovered faint chemical traces in parallel strokes, invisible under natural light. Analysis indicated repeated exposure to heat and candle smoke, hinting that the scroll had been studied under controlled, low-light conditions for long durations. Each subtle discoloration was a record of human interaction, devotion, and caution, layered across generations. Tiny fractures along the wax seal contained minute inscriptions, nearly imperceptible to the naked eye. When examined with electron microscopy, they revealed a shorthand-like code, letters looping into one another, as if each repetition held meaning only accessible to one who truly understood the context. It was not merely a letter, it was a safeguard, a puzzle embedded in form, content, and material. The parchment's cumulative mysteries converged in one unsettling pattern. Everything about it, from material, markings, and chemical traces to hidden codes and structural rhythms, implied a consciousness that extended beyond simple authorship. Every layer suggested intention, foresight, and awareness, as though the scroll itself had been designed to survive, hidden, waiting for the precise moment when it would be uncovered exactly as it has been. The final lines, barely visible beneath wax and centuries, whispered phrases that no one could fully decode, fragments that hinted at truths, warnings, and recognition of eyes that would someday see it. The text trembled with anticipation, never revealing more than a fraction, leaving the story suspended, a secret stretching across millennia, waiting for comprehension that may never arrive. A faint, almost imperceptible mark at the corner of the parchment shimmered under magnification, a symbol that had no name, no context, and no reference in any known language. It pulsed with intention, a silent signature that the letter's journey was not complete, that the story it carried was far from finished, and that the eyes now upon it were only the latest in an unbroken chain.